Hi, folks. Today I have the privilege and the pleasure of interviewing Noel Richards. Noel is, for any of you who are listening from the UK or Europe, in fact many of you from obviously America as well, will probably know the name Noel Richards. Noel's been a songwriter and a worship leader in the UK here, UK and Ireland for more than 25 years. Isn't that right, Noel? Because I saw your 25-year anniversary CD on your site.
Yeah, that's right, Andy. I mean, yeah. I started leading worship back in the middle 70s, actually, a long time ago, even before the words worship leader were invented and on people's lips.
Yeah.
I mean, in those days, we just got up and led people in singing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
actually, on that point, let me ask you just to kind of give a brief part of history, a brief synopsis of the Noel Richards journey as far as your ministry and stuff goes.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. I think my journey in Christian music started way back in 1971 when I went to my first big Christian gig, and I was probably about 16 at the time, and seeing a guy called Graham Kendrick singing his songs on the stage, and I thought, man, that's what I'd like to do. And that was like a role model for me, and that kind of got me started, got me thinking about singing. I began to sing in my local church. It's always a good place to start.
Yeah.
People often say, where do you start? And I said, well, start where you are. Start with the people that you know. So I used to sing in the local church. That gradually led to other opportunities. The pastor of our church was friends with a guy involved with Youth for Christ, so that got me involved with Youth for Christ.
Yeah.
And eventually I started working full-time for them. That got me moving down to various places in England, and I eventually settled in the west of England, a city called Plymouth, met my wife there, carried on making music, and then we met a friend called Gerald Coates, who was leading a newer kind of church in the late 70s, early 80s, up in the London area. So we eventually moved up there almost 30 years ago, and that's where we've been ever since.
Wow.
And the music's run alongside that. Taking the opportunities as they've come. Found that really the area of fruitfulness for me was in leading worship and writing worship songs. So that's really what I've concentrated on since the mid-1980s.
Right, okay. So from what you're saying, that prior to that, leading worship and writing worship songs really wasn't the starting point for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in the early years, the kind of music that you played if you were a Christian artist, it wasn't worship music. It was like songs talking about the Christian message. So we found ourselves doing a lot of evangelistic work in universities and schools and colleges, and writing songs really, which were songs that people could listen to rather than sing along to.
Yeah.
And we were using music really as an evangelistic tool in those early years.
Okay, and what was was there a defining moment when that changed, when worship leading, it kind of migrated from that expression of music to...
Yeah, I think there were a couple of things happening. I was traveling with a guy that was leading our church, and so we found ourselves in situations where he'd be preaching, I'd sing a couple of songs before he preached, maybe after he preached.
Yeah.
But we noticed that people weren't turning up for concerts as much.
Right.
They actually were turning out for worship celebrations. And we found that what people wanted to come along to were actually events where they could engage and worship rather than just sit back and listen.
Yeah, yeah.
So I began to change what I was doing. People started to invite me, instead of coming to do a concert, they wanted me to come and lead worship. And quite by sort of accident, I started to write worship songs. And one of the best-known songs that I wrote was a song called "You Laid Aside Your Majesty."
Yeah, yeah.
And that started to get me known as a worship songwriter. But I think the breakthrough came, 21 years ago when my wife Tricia and we wrote a song called "All Heaven Declares."
Yeah.
And that just had this huge impact, which I'd never seen before. People coming up to me asking for the chords, the music, the recording, because they wanted to take it back to their own church and sing it. Right. And then my publisher said to me, no, I think your area of fruitfulness is definitely worship leading and worship songwriting. I think that's what you should focus on. And so that's really what I've been doing since the late 1980s.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my journey in worship really started around about then, and All Heaven Declares was just such a huge song at that point.
Yeah.
So it's funny from, I guess, from my perspective, and maybe some other folks from my generation, because with hindsight, that was a huge song. It was very influential throughout the church, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure further afield at that time.
Yeah.
So it seemed like at that time, from my perspective, as someone who was coming new into it and just cutting my teeth, it seemed like you'd been around for a while. But obviously, but from what you're saying, that was actually the first kind of significant, kind of big impact of one of your songs.
That's right. I mean, it's just an amazing sort of surprise to me. I remember being at a big Methodist church conference about 6 or 7 months after we'd written All Heaven Declares, and I was waiting to go on because I was doing like a concert set in the middle of this large celebration for several thousand people, and they were just having like a worship gathering before we came out to do the concert, and suddenly all these people started singing All Heaven Declares, and I remember standing in this room, looking out onto the garden of this venue where all these thousands of people were worshiping. I'm thinking, that's amazing. They know my song. And I'd never quite experienced anything like that. Writing a song that has, as we say in the trade, a song that has legs. It just seems to travel around the world, and everybody's singing it. And it was just an amazing thing to experience. And so that was quite a turning point for me in my writing. Yeah. And as I said, when my publisher said, "Noel, I think you ought to record a worship album," that spurred me on to, find other worship songs by other writers, as well as writing my own. Okay. And in those days, like the late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't the multitude of worship songwriters around at that time. Yeah. And people were hungry for good worship songs, good contemporary worship songs. So everywhere I traveled, I'd pick up worship songs by other writers that were working, and I'd bring them back to the UK, and I'd put them on my worship albums. So I was acting as a kind of a worship A&R guy as well. Not just doing my own songs, but other people's songs that I thought were really working well and needed exposure in the UK.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let me just pick up on that. Let's go back to All Heaven Declares, and let me ask. Well, it's kind of I guess two questions in one. Could you kind of outline for us, what are the kind of fundamental differences between writing a worship song that's obviously has to be sung by a congregation, and your view of writing songs that are maybe I know the definitions of what worship is and what worship isn't are it's a mute point in a lot of cases, but a song that's to be sung by a congregation and a song that's effectively a performance song, or to use that term, and also just perhaps you could unpack a wee bit of the history of the writing of All Heaven Declares.
I'm just trying to think about that and how best to answer that, because I think whenever you write a song, you are wanting to write a song that will engage with the listener. Yeah. So whether that's a song which I'd say is more of a performance song, that you want to present to somebody as they're sitting down and listening, that's a song which I'd say is more of a performance song, that you want to present to somebody as they're sitting down and listening. You still want to have that resting place in their heart. So I think there are principles where you really are looking for a strong musical hook and a strong lyrical hook that people will take away with them. There used to be a program on television here in the UK years ago called the Old Grey Whistle Test, and I often wondered what that meant. And somebody once said to me, well, does the song pass the Old Grey Whistle Test? Do you whistle it once you've heard it? And I think what we're trying to do as writers is write in such a way that people do remember the songs, and they stay with them long after the concert is over or the worship event is over. So I think there are a lot of similarities between writing for a congregation and writing for an audience to listen to. You're still wanting to engage. And that really is the skill that you acquire in writing over the years.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question fully, Andy, but that's what I would.